Hi, this is Sean with Ohmmu Energy, and today we're going to show you how to swap the 12-volt battery in your Tesla Model X. All right, this process is going to pertain to the 2016 through 2021 Model X's. That is all Model X's up until they swapped over to the new little 15-volt lithium battery in the refresh X's. The X, to me, is still the most beautiful Tesla, and definitely the one, if I were buying a Tesla right now, the one I would pick, especially after the big price drop that happened recently. I think they've become a great value. They're fast, they've got great range, they're very good looking cars. So I think they're still very exotic looking cars too. They're not super common, and so they still have a very, very exotic look to them. So we're gonna swap the 12-volt battery in this Model X for the latest and greatest new Ohmmu 12-volt lithium battery. This X actually already has an Ohmmu 12-volt lithium battery, and we're swapping it to the new one in this video just as an instructional aid so you can see how to do it, and to show you a little bit about the difference between the old and new version of the Ohmmu battery. So I'll show you quick. The new battery, one, has Bluetooth, so you can download the Ohmmu app, connect to the battery, get data from it. The other thing is it has self-heating technology. So this battery, during charging in extreme cold situations, is actually able to warm itself up internally. And that is a pretty neat feature if you live in cold climates. The other cool updates are SAE terminals. So these no longer use any kind of lead spacers like our previous model did. And the case sizing is a little bit smaller, and so it fits into the bracket easier without any white lithium grease, which doesn't need to be applied to any of the corners like previously. So it's a big update, and it's a great product, and it's going to have the same internal capacity, and it's the same weight as the previous model, but it's got all of those cool updates to the platform. All right, let's talk about tools. You'll need a 10 millimeter socket and a 13 millimeter socket wrench, and then I like to have a power drill of some sort because there's a whole bunch of bolts you need to remove, and it can get a bit tedious, and you'll see as we go why. So those are all you really need to do this process. Then safety is the other consideration of things to have with you. A pair of gloves with a rubberized coating for both the protection from acid, but also from electrical protection and insulation. And then a pair of goggles or some kind of safety glasses we recommend, especially when dealing with the lead acid battery because of the potential for leaking acid and how bad that could be if it potentially got in your eyes. So with that said, the other thing that I like to bring if I know I'm going into a lead acid battery removal is a plastic bag of some sort, because the battery acid, if it's cracked out of the side of the case or in any way, or if the battery gets tipped during the process or after the process, it's just that acid is very, very corrosive and can cause a lot of damage to anything around it. So go ahead and just put the battery straight into the plastic bag, cinch it up so at least you're protecting everything around it from that battery. So to do the swap, you need to remove all the plastic trim around the outside. Then we're going to remove this whole Frunk tub. Really good time to go ahead and swap your HEPA filter if you haven't recently. It should probably be done every year or two because depending on where you live, there could be a lot of dust and buildup, and if you really want to have clean air in the cabin, it's a good idea to swap that. It's where all the fresh air comes into the cabin, passes through that big HEPA filter. And if your vehicle wasn't equipped with one, you still have the big plastic tray where it goes, and you can buy an insert. You can buy it from Ohmmu actually when you order the battery, and that insert HEPA filter can just fit right in there, and you didn't need to have a HEPA filter from the factory in order to use that feature. But if you did, you just cut the old one out and swap it in. But anyways, we're going to remove that big HEPA filter tray, and then the battery is in a little metal tray here, and we're going to remove that after disconnecting it. And before we disconnect the 12 volt, we're also going to disconnect the high voltage through the high voltage safety loop. Then swap the battery and of course reverse the steps. So we're going to get into that now and show you how to do it. So we'll remove all these trims, starting with the top. They all just pull out. So you'll see they've got like little clip kind of things, and each one just pulls out of its socket. Don't worry, you're not breaking anything to yank it out. Same on the sides. And this side. And the front. Now that all of those are out of the way, we'll go ahead and get the carpet out. There are 2 wires at the front which connect to lights. We want to make sure we detach these by pressing on the clip and sliding them out of their sockets. Then that whole carpet will come out. Now we've got a bunch of 10mm bolts that we're going to remove. This is where it's really helpful to have a cordless drill with the attachments on it for your socket. Here's where it's nice to bring in a swivel socket if you have one, because these bottom corners are a little bit tight, so it's just easier if you've got this to zip them out. Once you've got all of the bolts out, you can leave them in. It's an easy place to store them while you're working on it. Move these 2 wires out of the little cutouts so that the wires don't get snagged. Then you can lift this tub up. It's fairly light, although large, and set that to the side. So now we've got a great shot of the bioweapon defense mode HEPA filter. This filter is great. Keeps the interior air coming in really nice, but as you can see, they do get really dirty because they do pull in a large volume of air, and they do a really good job of filtration. Every 2 years or so, it's probably a good idea to replace it. This one hasn't been replaced, which we'll do in another video, and we'll show you how to do that. We're actually going to upgrade it to one of our Ohmmu HEPA filters with a carbon-activated charcoal section on it, which is pretty cool. But for now, if you're just doing the 12-volt battery, all you've got to do to get this out of the way is lift it up and take it right out of the way. It actually secures to the back of that tub that we removed. And so by taking all those bolts off, we already loosened it up. All right, now that we are in here behind the HEPA filter housing, we can go ahead and disconnect the high voltage loop, safety loop. You just push the button and slide that out. And you can leave that right there. Then this is actually a nice to have tool, but if you have one of these with a swivel head on it, on a ratcheting wrench, you can use that to reach that terminal to loosen it. I always do the negative first because I would rather have a negative wire floating around in there while working versus the positive, because the chassis of the vehicle is already grounded to the negative, which means if the negative wire touches the metal body of the vehicle, doesn't matter. It was already touching the body of the vehicle. So in this case, we have these little spacers, which we'll just go ahead and put it to the side. Then you can take this cap off of the positive terminal and loosen that. This vehicle also has a Frunk power kit, so it has an extra wire connected here that you probably don't have. But if you do, just loosen that up and slide that out. Now that those are totally disconnected, the vehicle is totally powered down. It has no high voltage and it has no 12 voltage connected. So there's two 10mm bolts down here and then two 13mm bolts up top that we need to remove in order to remove this entire metal tray. If you had a lead acid battery, this little tube would have been plugged into the side of it, and it is completely unnecessary with the lithium, so you can just tuck it down out of the way. If you have an extra zip tie, you can zip tie it back over here to the tubing to use in the future. In this case, you can actually see it was pinched off over here, so it wouldn't have been very functional anyways. All right, so we'll remove these two 10mm down here. Once you got them loose, you should be able to work them all the way out by hand. Just be careful when you're working in this space not to drop tools or bolts. Not so much because of a safety issue, because it's kind of a pain in the butt to go fetch them down into the abyss of this space up here. Always find these bolts to be much longer than they need to be. Now up top, there's going to be two 13mm bolts. There's also a wire that kind of sits on top of here that's held in place by the top mounting bolt for the case, the tray itself. Just pull that straight up, and that'll help give you a little bit more space in there. And then you can see the two 13mm bolts. We're just going to loosen those up. Once you've got those loose, you should be able to go back in by hand and remove them. And I will say now, while you're in this area, this is one of the big reasons we make sure we wear rubber gloves. And the other good thing about this tool is actually an example of a very bad tool to use because it's not insulated at all, but it's actually a really good idea to have an insulated set of tools when working with live voltages, because if you were to drop this socket wrench across your terminals here, in this battery, it actually has built-in protections and safety and it wouldn't do much, but if it were a lead acid battery, they have no internal protection whatsoever, and it would just immediately start dumping all of its energy through the short circuit that you've created. The tool could melt into the terminals quickly, cause all sorts of arcing. You could have a real disaster on your hands in that case. So it's a great idea to have an insulated tool to prevent that from ever happening. The other good thing about using rubber gloves is you can use your hand as a barrier between the positive and negative terminals as you work in order to prevent such a thing from happening. Now that you've got those two 13mm bolts off and the two 10s, this whole tray will slide out. You kind of lift it up until the bottom is freed like that, Then you can dump it out of the bottom. There's actually one hose holding it on there. Just pull that off. And now you have the 12-volt battery tray and battery assembly removed. So now we'll actually take this, we'll put it on the floor, remove this, pull the battery out, put the new one in. All right, go ahead and remove this 10mm bolt or nut and that holder. Then slide that battery out. Now the new battery goes in with the terminals facing forward. Put this back in to hold it down. And that will snugly hold it in its place. Now we can reinstall that assembly. All right, we'll go ahead and reinstall this new assembly. While we do that, we'll show you a quick video actually from our last install of the weight difference between the lithium and the lead. So there's your factory battery. It's about a little over 21 pounds. This is going to be a lithium iron phosphate replacement battery from Ohmmu Energy, and that's 11 pounds. So you're going to save 10 pounds of weight just by swapping the battery. So here you just need to kind of work at getting the top part up high enough to get this metal over the lip there. Then go ahead and insert all of your bolts just hand or finger tight. Don't snug any of them fully yet until you've got them all in place, or you may make it difficult for yourself to feed the rest in. Once you got all 4 bolts in place, then go ahead and tighten them down. Now that you've got the bracket secured in place, now will be the time to remove these caps. Just remove one at a time as you use them. And it's a good idea to just always leave them on until the last moment, basically. Before we make the second connection, so we'll go ahead and connect the positive here. So with this vehicle, we're going to need to reconnect the Frunk, the power Frunk actuator wire, which is right here, but on most vehicles, you're not going to need to do that. You're not going to have this wire there. There are a couple of things to secure onto the case here. Now, down here, this tube has a little push. There's a wire in the back that you probably can't see on the camera very well, but you'll be able to see it in real life that pushes on there. And there's the wire that we pulled off directly straight up from the top that will now push down on the top. Now that you've got those secured, we're still not going to connect the negative until we reconnect the high voltage. So go ahead and reconnect this. So it sounds like I say we're going to connect the high voltage and that means the car is going to have high voltage now, but actually it's not, because the way that works is the high voltage has a contactor that opens and closes, and that opening and closing of the contactor requires 12 volt power. So when we disconnected that the first time, we forced that contactor open. And until it gets 12 volt power, it cannot close. So once it has opened and you've removed 12 volt power, even putting that back in place, it's never going to re-energize the high voltage pack until it gets 12 volt power. So once you connect this, then is when the car will come to life. So that is why we saved that to be the last step. So when you make this connection, there may be some arcing or sparking. So you just kind of line it up and then move quickly. And then tighten it down. And then you'll quickly hear potentially clicking of contactors on the vehicle. You might hear pumps whir up. In this case, we're hearing some coolant pumps start up. All of that is normal. Make sure we put this cover back on here. So now we're going to put the HEPA filter back in place. This vehicle has somewhat of an interesting history here, actually, and I can show you on the back. This is what they said was evidence of rodent damage. So there's actually rodents that were living up in here and chewing away at some of these pieces. They did so in some other areas too, as well as a wiring harness that had to get replaced on this car. Kind of interesting stuff. Something that I feel is less common in the engine-powered vehicle world, only because the heat of the engine probably kills any rodents that are living up there every time you start the car. Whereas here, a rodent could live here happily. Every time you drive, it really doesn't get so hot anywhere as to kill them, and so they could live happily up here for years. Now the plastic tub goes in place. On that subject as well, I was also told that some of the wiring material that was used in these vehicles tends to be more susceptible because of a soy-based additive to the insulation, which I thought was interesting. So potentially they're saying that the wires are a little more tasty than others to the rodents. And I will say I have seen, I don't work on a lot of non-electrics, but I have seen a handful of Teslas that are, of course, not very old in general as vehicle brand, but with rodent damage. So we go ahead and just put all of these back in by hand at first, and then you can snug them all in with your power tool. Make sure when you are snugging them in, especially for these ones along the back, but really for all of them, don't over torque them. They don't need monstrous amounts of torque. But these ones in the back, they're little tabs off of that filter housing, and so they can easily snap the tabs. Now we can put the carpet back in place, and make sure you plug in the 2 wires in the front as you do that. See, there's a purple one and a green one. They just plug into the back of the lights. Which you can see just like so. Then all this carpet does is push down in, and you can pull this rubber up all the way around to tuck it under. Some people actually would remove this entire rubber gasket and then come back in and just reinstall it. I don't feel like that saves time, but it's an option. Once that gasket is in all the way around, put back in this plastic piece in the front. All of the clip points just push straight down, and they will click into their spots. Then you've got the 2 sides. Same thing, just push down. They'll click into their spots. And then the top one goes straight across there. Now this is should you leave it out or leave it tucked? I see most vehicles this is tucked. I'm always of the belief that it should be left out and exposed, which was its intention from the original design. But to each their own. I think most people maybe don't like the way it looks, but I think it looks fine, and it gives a sense of what it does and where it is. So now this is all reassembled. The battery is swapped. There's one last step on a Model X, which is to recalibrate the rear doors, which we will show you how to do inside. It's very easy. You just hold down the button that says calibrate. All right, now that you are back in the vehicle, it actually did not require us to calibrate, but if it were to require you to recalibrate, it would be right here, and there'd be a little button right here that says calibrate rear doors, and you would just hold it, and they would open just ever so slightly and then reclose on both sides, and then the rear doors would be calibrated. Maybe in a later software update, it now doesn't need that recalibration on 12-volt swaps. We'll have to see. So some of the really good reasons to swap out your old lead acid battery to lithium would be the weight savings is pretty big, pretty dramatic, about 1/3 of the weight. The lifespan is great, so you only have to do this process once instead of maybe 2 or 3 times with the lead every period. The environmental impact of using less materials, less mass in each battery, and less times is also significant. I'm always a big proponent of efficiency, and so when you can do something less frequently and do it better, I think that's a better efficient use of your time. And also, of course, saving some weight in a vehicle that you're going to be moving every single day, and every mile the vehicle is driven is also a little gain to efficiency too, which is great. All right, that's it. We have successfully swapped the 12-volt battery in this Tesla Model X, and it will now get to enjoy the experience of a new Ohmmu 12-volt lithium battery. If you ever need any help from us at Ohmmu, you can reach us at ohmmu.com/support, and you can always reach out to us via email, support@ohmmu.com. And of course, you can also download our app for any of the new batteries, so you can use their features with Bluetooth. And that is just either the App Store for Android or for iOS, and it's just called Ohmmu, and it's Ohmmu BMS. Thanks for watching, everybody, and enjoy your cars.